A morally degraded country was shown where the crime rate was high and nobody was safe. The criminal rate was very high and nobody was able to control it. The police were very worried. Government officials called a meeting where they proposed a suggestion that they should form and include a robotics army to control the crime rate. The scene then showed a company that was given an order to form a robot. The company manufactured so many robots that can help humans to control the crime rate. A malfunctioning and not working robot was sent to the manufacturing unit for repairs due to recurring faults. Meanwhile, 3 criminals transporting drugs experience an accident, causing the drugs to fall and be wasted. In response, the aggrieved man begins to yell at the criminals, demanding his money back or threatening to shoot them. The police, along with a robotic army, arrived to capture the criminals, but all the drug dealers managed to escape. However, before leaving, one of the criminals shoots the repaired robot, causing severe damage and necessitating its transfer to the repair unit. Unfortunately, the damage was so extensive that the scientists decided to send it to the recycling unit, as the battery was completely damaged. The criminal calls the leader of the drug dealers and demands the money back, threatening to kill them all if it's not returned. The drug dealer becomes deeply worried and asks his associates how they can gather $20 million. A woman suggests robbing a bank, but the issue is the pervasive robotic army, which is deployed to apprehend criminals. She concludes by proposing that they capture the manufacturer of the robots so they can deactivate all of them. The scientist who previously manufactured crop robots, now working tirelessly on an idea to create a robot capable of speaking, thinking, and communicating with people independently, with its separate brain. He presents these ideas to the CEO of his company, but the CEO dismisses them as mere castles in the air. The scientist is deeply hurt by the CEO's words but resolves not to let his hard work go to waste. Despite this setback, he decided to conduct the experiments independently and continue working on his ideas. The scientist returned to the robot that he had sent for recycling. He decided to conduct all of his experiments on this robot. He picked up the robot and placed it in his car, but unfortunately, a group of drug leaders caught him. They took him to a secret location and demanded that he reveal the method to deactivate the robotic army. The scientist was shocked to hear their demands and informed them that he couldn't issue the command, as the entire robotics network was attached to the central system. The drug dealers checked his car and discovered a robot. They inquired if it was a new robot, to which the scientist replied that it was an old one. He clarified that he intended to conduct critical experiments on it. The drug dealers demanded that he create a new robot, and they would assist him in its creation and management, ensuring its upkeep. The drug dealers instructed the scientist that he had to conduct all experiments in their presence. The scientist inserted an installation chip into the robot and connected it to the computer. When he plugged it in, the robot sprang to life and began acting like a child, displaying fear and behaving in an innocent, childlike manner. Everyone attempted to soothe the robot. The female drug dealer found it adorable and intriguing, affectionately calling it Chappie, like the main character from the movie. The drug dealers turned hostile, pointing a gun at the scientist and ordering him to leave, suggesting that they intended to take custody of the robot. Terrified, the scientist fled the scene. The company, where scientists were engrossed in creating robot models, was shown. However, the CEO was displeased with the designs, as they were too large and would consume excessive electrical power, leading to losses rather than benefits. The scene then shifted back to the young scientist, who returned to the company. He intensified his efforts and designed various smart and unique robot models. The CEO was highly impressed with these new designs, bringing him immense joy, and everyone congratulated him on his success. The engineer who had designed the larger robot models. He began to feel jealous of the young scientist and started threatening him, claiming that he would steal the chip and data of the robot that the scientist had created. However, when the engineer attempted to locate the chip, he couldn't find it anywhere. Feeling anxious, he started searching for the robot that had been sent for recycling. The scene then showed Chappie, who believed that the drug dealers were his family. The drug dealers began to teach him various methods of stealing so that he could steal for them. In the next scene, the engineer returned to the young scientist and, at gunpoint, demanded the chip. The scientist asked the engineer about his issues, to which the engineer was informed that there was no chip. The engineer attempted to shoot the scientist, but the gun was empty, and he simply smiled and left. The scientist decided to return to Chappie, and the engineer, having seen the scientist leaving the company, began to follow him. The scientist met with Chappie and assured him that they would only engage in ethical and legitimate work. He extracted a promise from Chappie that he would refrain from any wrongdoing. Chappie agreed, pledging to only undertake virtuous tasks. The scientist then encouraged Chappie to learn painting and drawing. The female drug dealer also enjoyed their company. However, the malevolent drug dealer arrived and started to kick the scientist, expressing his displeasure with his presence and warning him that he would be killed if he returned. The malevolent drug dealer took Chappie to his group of gangster friends and instructed them to attack Chappie to test his abilities. They began to beat and pelt Chappie with stones. However, as Chappie was not a part of the robotic army and behaved more like a child, he was unable to defend himself. The gangsters continued to assault Chappie, eventually setting his body on fire. Despite the ordeal, Chappie managed to escape. Meanwhile, the engineer managed to locate Chappie and kidnapped him, successfully removing the chip from his body. After extracting the chip, the engineer resolved to kill Chappie. However, as he began to destroy Chappie's body, Chappie regained consciousness and managed to escape. Chappie then rushed back to the drug dealers in a critical state. The kind-hearted female drug dealer provided him with care and comfort as he was visibly frightened. The scene transitioned to the morning, where the concerned scientist insisted that Chappie learn self-defense. He acknowledged his mistake in taking Chappie to the gangster friends but justified it by emphasizing the importance of Chappie's self-protection. Despite the scientist's plea, Chappie refused to learn self-defense, standing by his promise to the scientist that he would not engage in wrongdoing. The drug dealer realized that Chappie wasn't receptive, so he resorted to manipulation, taking advantage of Chappie's childlike mind. He convinced Chappie that the weapons were non-lethal and harmless, leading Chappie to learn how to use them. The drug dealer was elated as he had plans to carry out robberies. He further manipulated Chappie into believing that his cars had been stolen, urging him to retrieve the stolen cars. Naive and trusting Chappie agreed and began stealing cars. By selling the spare parts of the stolen cars, the drug dealer amassed considerable wealth. Chappie sat beside a dead dog, visibly sorrowful. It was nighttime. The drug dealer urged Chappie not to be despondent, reminding him that all living beings eventually die. Chappie retorted, asserting that he wouldn't die as he was a robot. However, the drug dealer pointed out his battery, which was turning red, suggesting that the scientist had engineered his demise. This revelation deeply affected Chappie, leading him to develop a sense of animosity towards the scientist. The drug dealer, perceiving Chappie's emotional vulnerability, increased Chappie's worth in his eyes, promising to make him immortal. He convinced Chappie to rob a bank, assuring him that the money acquired would be spent on extending Chappie's life, thus making him immortal. Initially hesitant, Chappie eventually agrees to the robbery due to his desire for immortality. The young scientist, who was deeply concerned about Chappie, believed that Chappie would bring about devastation in the world. Determined to reach out to Chappie and make him reconsider, the scientist called out to him, but Chappie remained silent, having developed a strong hatred for the scientist. Chappie moved upstairs, and the scientist followed him, inquiring why Chappie wasn't responding. Chappie expressed his resentment, accusing the scientist of deliberately placing him in a body with a limited lifespan. The scientist attempted to persuade Chappie that he was misunderstanding the situation and misinterpreting the scientist's intentions. The engineer succeeded in his rivalry against the scientist. He managed to deactivate the data of all the robots and cause them to malfunction. Consequently, the entire robotic army of the country became inactive. With the robotic systems down, the criminals began to rob people openly. Meanwhile, Chappie's system also started to deactivate. The scientist swiftly took him to the lab and began working on restoring his functions. The scientist was able to rescue the function of Chappie before it was about to end. Chappie regained consciousness and hugged the scientist. In the lab, he saw a strange and big robot. He liked it. He asked the scientist to transfer him to that giant robot. But the scientist told him that all the robots are ICE, artificial intelligence, yet Chappie was unique, as he could think, behave, and act on his own. Chappie became angry and started to fight with the scientist, saying, "You don't want me to become strong and immortal." Meanwhile, the engineer was also hiding in the corner of the lab, amazed at how a robot AI could behave like humans. Chappie didn't listen to the scientist and managed to escape with a neurotransmitter so that he could copy his data into a chip. While he was doing so, a drug dealer approached him and asked him to participate in a robbery. Chappie agreed and joined them, engaging in numerous robberies. The news also reported his activities on TV. The scientist became extremely worried upon seeing Chappie's actions. Meanwhile, the engineer went to the CEO and informed her about the scientist, emphasizing that he had been forbidden to work on his ideas and experimental plans for the robot, but he had proceeded regardless. He requested one chance from her. After a lengthy argument, the CEO finally permitted him to operate his giant robot. The engineer took command of his robot and sent it to kill Chappie. The scientist, worried about Chappie, rushed to protect him. A new mastermind drug dealer made a final entrance, demanding money from the criminal gang. A massive fight broke out, with bullets and shooting everywhere. The scientist was hit by a bullet. When Chappie saw this, he ran to save the scientist. The giant robot also killed the female drug dealer. Chappie was heartbroken and sad because he considered her as his mother. He carried the scientist back to the lab, where they found the engineer. The engineer pointed his gun at Chappie, but Chappie killed him. Chappie made every effort to save the scientist and transferred his consciousness into the robot's body. They also transferred the consciousness of the female drug dealer into the robot's body. The transformed robot, now housing the consciousness of both the scientist and the female drug dealer, stands amidst the remnants of the chaotic battle. Chappie, torn between the memories of the scientist who nurtured him and the bond he shared with the female drug dealer, grapples with the conflicting emotions within him. As the dust settles, Chappie's gaze shifts to the horizon, contemplating the complex nature of humanity and machines, pondering his existence in this intricate world. With a newfound sense of purpose, he strides forward, determined to forge his path, seeking to protect and preserve life, as the sun sets on the city, casting long shadows over the transforming landscape.